Okay, everyone, I think we'll get started. We might have some others join us throughout the workshop, but for now, welcome everyone who's here to From Research to Policy, Phenology in Africa. And this is our final workshop in a series of workshops we've been running over the past 6 months for the African Phenology Network COP26 project. And these workshops have been kind of charting the progress of this project, but they've also been exploring individual ideas such as perspectives from the African continent on phenology, international perspectives from other research networks and what they can advise to a developing research network such as us. And of course now we're looking towards the end of the project at the outputs of the project, including the results of a Phenology Capacity Survey that we've had going out and some field trials. But Hervé and Emma and Bruna and Desiree, who will all be presenting today, will tell you a bit about that. And additionally, Bruna and Desiree will give us a perspective from their experiences using phenocams outside of these trials, as they've been doing so for longer than us. But just a little bit of housekeeping from me to begin with. Everyone is welcome to have their cameras on, of course. We just ask that you're muted during presentations, but we will have a nice discussion at the end, and you'd all be, of course, encouraged to unmute yourselves, or if you'd prefer, you can also just use the chat function to discuss, and we'll have a couple opportunities to have questions to the speakers as well, and that will also, you can do the same there too. And this workshop is being recorded, so we'll be able to share it afterwards. We have a YouTube channel, and that just allows people who are not able to attend these workshops in person at the time to be able to catch up with them and still engage with the content. And yes, so the order of things, we'll have our survey results and an introduction by Emma first, and then Hervé is going to present on the results of our field trials, and then Desiree and Bruna are going to present their experiences with phenocams. So perhaps we can all the speakers could just give a quick introduction to themselves before Emma takes forward an introduction. Desiree and Bruna, do you perhaps want to go first? Just introduce yourselves to everyone.
Hi, hello everyone. I'm Desiree. I'm a postdoc at University of Sao Paulo, Unesp. I'm working with Patrícia Morelato and also a lot with my colleague Bruno Alberton. And I've been conducting research, phenology research with cameras since 2017. Previously, I used to study seed germination and find effects on seed germination of cerrado, of Brazilian savanna, and in 2017 I switched for phenology and phenocam, and I've been working with that since then. Nice to meet you all.
Hi everybody, I'm Bruna. Thank you for the invitation, Erin and Emma. I'm a postdoc fellow also at the same place as Desiree. I'm working with Patricia since a couple of years already. I'm working with I have some experience with the ground observation as well. It's what I was studying during my undergrad. And then I went to work with Patricia and I started to work with the leaf phenology and more specifically with the phenocameras. So we have started our network, the e-phenology network. So I'm there since the beginning in 2011, and I helped to deploy all the cameras here in Brazil. And now we have been analyzing all the data sets. And so I'm basically working with the leafing exchanges and mostly in seasonal tropical vegetation.
Hervé, would you like to go next? Yeah.
Okay, sorry, it's only 5 o'clock over here. So I'm Hervé from Gabon, and I'm trying to finish my PhD where I'm looking at human-wildlife interaction around national park and including food phenology to understand if there is an impact of food scarcity on the human and wildlife interaction, particularly forest elephant. But before that, I was working in Gabon mostly on the forest dynamic, looking at the growth of forests and interaction with climate change around the logging. Thank you.
Great. Shall I introduce myself and then start the presentation?
Yeah, perfect.
Yeah. So I'm Emma Bush. I currently work at the Botanic Garden in Edinburgh, and I have been working in the field of phenology in Central Africa for about 7 years now, since my PhD, which was focused at Lope National Park in Gabon. And I currently chair the steering group for the African Phenology Network, which I'm about to tell you more about. So welcome everybody to our 4th workshop in this series. And I'm just gonna share my screen with the normal slight faff that we're all doing 2 years into online workshops. Right, so can everybody see that? Fine, great. So as introduced by Erin, today we're going to be looking a bit about moving from research to policy and some other sort of discussions that are still out there for us to sort of have and learn a bit more about on the way. So this is a little bit kind of just the end of this project at the moment, has to draw to an end this week. So we're thinking again about what we've learned and how we're going to take it forward. The focus of the funding that we got from the Royal Society of Edinburgh was COP26, as lots of things are right now. And I just thought I would start from there to kind of focus our minds a little bit about what is being hoped to be achieved at COP26, starting next week. The 4 stated main aims of the UK government who are hosting this is to achieve net zero by mid-century, so that's to keep global warming within the 1.5 degrees of warming, adapt to protect communities and natural habitats, mobilise finance, particularly from rich nations who have caused most of the changes to our climate, to the nations that are actually dealing with climate changes, and also, you know, losing out on the ability to develop in the same carbon heavy way. Yeah, their 4th one is aiming to finalise the Paris rulebook. So this is all very like high politics that most of us here, if we're scientists, it can be quite daunting to get our heads around. Maybe that's just me, but you know, we're so involved at the creating the knowledge, and then now we're sort of handing that over to the ministers and the governments who are going to be negotiating this. So obviously where sort of what we're talking about today fits in, we really felt was in this theme of urgently adapting to protect communities and natural habitats. So that's something that we felt our expertise as a phenology network. Phenology has often been seen as a scientific discipline which creates evidence of climate change. And I think while that's true, we've already created a lot of evidence of climate change, and it's now thinking about how we use this knowledge and this discipline to actually help countries adapt to the changes that are happening. So that's the kind of shift in focus that's sort of happening now. And something I particularly wanted to raise from this page about this major theme of adaptation. As they say, plans and more finance needed to put in place to improve early warning systems, flood defences, and build resilient infrastructure and agriculture to avoid further loss of life, livelihoods and natural habitats. And obviously, I think the use of the term early warning system is referring to, say, maybe extreme weather events. But I also think it's really relevant for ecological changes that happen in the sort of short to mid-term, like changes in resource availability, changes to the dynamics of human-wildlife coexistence. And where we can really push our discipline in phenology is moving into not only real-time monitoring but forecasting as well, to try and create this early warning system for where changes are happening that are going to really impact ecosystems and people. And again, when we delve more into this action on adaptation, they're really driving for more finance to be in place to improve early warning systems. And this idea of building resilient infrastructure in agriculture, phenology has huge relevance to industrial agriculture, and there is a lot of funding put into understanding how crops respond to climate. But also that they don't really recognise there that there's a whole, significant bunch of people in the world who depend on natural resources, so not agricultural resources, natural resources from the wild. And I think, again, that's somewhere that phenology can be really important to help understand the vulnerability of access to those wild resources, whether that's wild meat or fruits and leaves and bark and that kind of thing. And protecting and restoring habitats is a really key part of adaptation. Phenology is one of the first places that you can begin to see changes in ecosystems and start to put out a warning that even though that, say, for example, the forest is there, it hasn't been cut down, it might not be functioning in the way that we're expecting it to in the long term. So I guess we've got these, the political discourse is becoming more and more aware of the climate and biodiversity crises and how these interact, and how the dominance of human activity on the world is really changing the direction of the global biome and how it functions. And I think phenology is quite an interesting discipline because it's where climate and biodiversity meet. It's literally the impact of seasonal climate on biodiversity, and the evidence that we provide through our expertise has something to say to both the climate and biodiversity crises. So even though it's quite a niche discipline and it's not particularly well known, I think it can hold a really important place in the kind of bringing together of these discourses. And I think all of you here will already be familiar with phenology, but we're simply talking about the seasonal cycles in living things. So whether that's emergence of insects, development of leafy canopies and shedding of leaves, or development of fruit from plants, it's anything that has a seasonality to it, and how climate impacts that seasonality, and how timing is sort of impacted as climate changes, but also how species interact with those the timing of these events. And as we've said, every one of these workshops, phenology is recognised as an essential biodiversity variable because it is highly sensitive to climate change. And in the context of the African Phenology Network, we've been talking about the need to that policymakers in Africa really need more ecological knowledge in this kind of early warning system way that I've been talking about, to successfully adapt to climate changes in African ecosystems. And in previous workshops, we've been explaining what the evidence for that is. And so that's us here. We're now the African Phenology Network. We are trying to bring together this knowledge amongst academics who work in this field across the African continent. And we currently have members of our network involved in field sites across, especially Central Africa or tropical Africa. And our main aims are to support research collaborations, to widen access and establish new methods, to grow new leadership. This is us, the steering group, who are all here today, and to provide evidence to support a thriving planet. And as Erin already sort of briefly introduced, the project that is running at the moment is our first funded project. We're a very new network, and we got some funding from the Royal Society of Edinburgh as part of their COP26 project funding. And we're aiming to take a rapid assessment of phenological monitoring capacity across sub-Saharan Africa for the purpose of climate adaptation. We've done this through a series of workshops, piloting some new field methods, and undertaking an online survey. So Just to briefly remind you, our first workshop, we heard about African perspectives on phenology monitoring. So we heard from some really key sites in phenology monitoring in Africa, and what the knowledge and expertise that we already have. And then in the second workshop, we heard from two really successful, established phenology networks, the USA National Phenology Network and India's Season Watch, and that was really interesting and inspiring to learn from them and the things that have gone well for them and the things that have been challenging. And then at our last workshop, we had a first look at the evidence that we created through this project, and pretty much at this one, we're going to be continuing looking at that evidence now that we've sort of completed our activities and looking at where we go from here. So I'm just going to just introduce you to the outputs of our capacity survey. So we produced an online survey in French and English, and we advertise this through our networks through a kind of snowballing technique. So it's not a random survey of people. We targeted experts in African phenology and asked them to share their views with us. And just a little description of the data set. We had 38 responses, which was our sort of minimum threshold. We were hoping for a lot more, but we reached our kind of minimum threshold of 30, so that's great. And 22 of those responses were from respondents from African nations. In general, the respondents were academic researchers and some NGO presence. They had an expertise in biological sciences and were generally educated to master's level and beyond. And their expertise was in forest research. Between the respondents, they had experience across 15 African nations. This is their professional experience, with a large presence in Gabon and Ghana, which is not surprising considering the steering group and where we've done our own activities, so where we've spread this survey. And in general, the professional expertise of the respondents was from unmodified or very little modified ecosystems, particularly forest. Again, and given the background of those of us on the steering group, that also is not surprising. And most of the people who responded were either active participants in phenology research or familiar with scientific evidence. So this is a highly expert academic respondent group. And just to share with you some of the main takeaways from this survey, we asked the respondents, why is phenology important? And those that ranked, we gave them a number of categories. They ranked these within their kind of top two. Biodiversity conservation, ecosystem services and climate adaptation were the main reasons why this academic group felt that phenology monitoring was important, with human-wildlife coexistence, agricultural production, human well-being and economic growth ranked much lower. Respondents also suggested other topics for why this is important, such as general ecology, plant functioning, forestry, global change biology, ecotourism, carbon science, history, ecological coexistence and restoration science. So there's clearly like a broad suite of motivations to study phenology, but if we're talking to an academic group, then these three, biodiversity conservation, ecosystem services and climate adaptation, are the main motivation they feel for studying phenology. So we asked the group who should be responsible for phenology monitoring, and way and above they ranked academic researchers and international research networks who should be responsible for conducting this. Government and NGOs were ranked much lower down this list. Other suggestions that were given were citizens and indigenous peoples, the UN, or large bodies like that, religious organisations, because they have, someone suggested them because they have, they're really rooted in place for a long period of time, which was interesting, and also industry. And then we asked the respondents, what are the barriers to phenological research in the African context? And far and above, the biggest barrier that was chosen was funding, followed by logistics, and then knowledge about phenology and political support were ranked much lower down. Again, other suggestions that respondents gave were lack of standardised protocols, difficulties in access to training and technical support, and phenology not being a priority or not recognised due to interdisciplinarity. And then finally, we asked the respondents, in blue here is, in orange here is what are the field methods that they are familiar with, and in blue is what are the field methods that they've used. And if I just point out to you, at the bottom here is direct canopy observation. So that would be using binoculars or just walking straight up to a plant and looking at various phenological aspects. That was well and above the most commonly most familiar method and also the most used method. And it's really stark that automatic cameras and flux towers and drones have the least access to from this respondent group. So the conclusions that we're taking from this survey, but we're keen to have your thoughts on, are that, you know, according to this group, you know, I would say the African Phenology Network is a suitable international academic network to take this discipline forward. So they feel that it really should be done by academics in international collaboration. And it's not very surprising, these outcomes, but I think it is really useful to have this evidence base to support it, that our focus really should be to enable access to funding. You know, the knowledge and motivation is there, but we really need the funding to enable this kind of research. People are crying out for developing standardized phenology methods, and we get emails about this sort of every week, somebody saying, I'm looking to do this project, what should I do? And we're already working on making manuals available on our website, and there are a number of international initiatives that are working forward on this. So I really hope that we can help link people up with that. And increase training in and access to technical field methods. And that's pretty much what the rest of this workshop is going to be about, how we've been really trying to push that forward for the African context with access to phenological cameras. And I think I'm going over my time a bit here, but just to flag up, this was recently published in Nature a few days ago in the comment section, and it's a call from Lee White, who's the Minister of Environment for Gabon, a number of other environment ministers, and even a Deputy Prime Minister from various countries in Central Africa, and leading scientists, a call for a big fund towards investing in science in the Congo Basin rainforest. And what they're saying is that this has some of the biggest uncertainties in climate modelling in this region, and also some of the biggest uncertainties in our understanding of ecosystems. And so they're really pushing for very targeted funding in this area, because this is the second largest rainforest region in the world, and it's incredibly important to how we mitigate climate change. And one of their key pieces of evidence that they use in here is a paper that a number of us published last year, showing this massive reduction in fruit production in Lope National Park in Gabon. So this is directly using evidence from a 30-year phenology study in Central Africa to evidence why extra funding is needed. So us coming out with our small survey saying we need more funding, scientists always say we need more funding, but I think this is a really directed call here that we can kind of lend our voice to, and we already have done through the evidence that we've provided through the science. So I just think it's this is sort of high-level collaboration between ministers, scientists, and those of us who are plugging away at the coalface, you know, creating the evidence for these kind of movements. I just think this is quite encouraging to see how we can feed into these sort of high-level discussions. Great, so that's all from me for now. I will stop sharing. Hopefully that's given you sort of the context to what we're doing. And I think, who am I handing over to now, Erin?
So yeah, we're moving on to Hervé next. Thanks so much, Emma, for your introduction and background to the project here and what we've been achieving with the survey.
Yeah, so can I just say, I meant to say at the beginning of my presentation, if you could just introduce yourself in the chat while we're giving our presentations, that would be really great, so that we could get to know who's here and who's attending.
Yeah, for sure. I forgot to say that as well. We'd love to be able to meet everyone, so please do introduce yourselves in the chat. Just before we move on to Hervé, we were wondering if anyone had any questions for Emma, or do you have to go, Emma?
No, that's absolutely fine. Sorry, yes, that is what we're meant to be doing. Does anyone have any questions? Any comments or questions on anything I just presented?
Hi, Emma.
Hi, Bismarck.
Yeah, I think I'm happy with the outcome of the survey. It has generated a number of interesting insights, particularly looking at the motivations for phenology monitoring. And it's also insightful that the top three, you have biodiversity conservation and also climate showing up in there. Yeah, so it really suggests that if we have to mobilize more people for phenology monitoring, there is quite good potential in there, and that presents work for us here at African Phenology Network. Yeah, thank you. It's a nice presentation.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, I think there's probably nothing in there that's kind of completely unexpected, but I think it provides us with this evidence base that as we're developing our own research ideas going forward and new funding calls, we can really like fall back on this to say, look, we've consulted the community, and yeah, this is why we're specifically asking for this thing rather than because we've plucked it out of nowhere. So I think it would be really helpful for us going forward. It would have been nice to have heard from more policymakers, but that just shows how disconnected we are from them at the moment. I think that when we put this out there, we just are reaching other academics. It's quite hard to actually get through to policymakers to hear what they have to think.
Yeah, I mean, we can't be too sure. Maybe policymakers also shied away from the survey.
Maybe.
Maybe, yeah. Yeah, because in my context, I was really looking at, if I look at phenology monitoring in Ghana, who are the policymakers I should send this out to? And there was a limitation. I sent some emails to some people, but I'm not sure if they were able to respond.
Yeah.
So maybe they are not too familiar with the
Maybe we need a different technique as well, like one-to-one interviews with key policymakers. They don't have time to fill in a survey. They don't know what this field is. It seems really abstract.
Perhaps, yeah, that would be a good suggestion.
Okay, shall we move over to Hervé then, and we can discuss more at the end?
Yeah, I was just going to say, if anyone does think of anything else, we'll have a discussion at the end of the workshop as well, so we'll have more time then too. And for now, yeah, let's move on to Hervé, who's going to present on work largely conducted by Bismarck, who was just chatting to Emma there, who's also on our steering group. And this is the results really of the field trials which Emma mentioned, which originally were going to take place in 3 countries. But due to delays, which we actually explained in our last workshop, we had a lot to learn about how to ship cameras internationally and get them through customs. But we did so in Ghana, and Bismarck has been collecting data with them there. So everybody's going to present on how they found that experience.
Okay, can you see my screen then? Okay, so as Erin said, this project was going to be implemented in 3 countries, but finally, because of some issue of sending camera, we did that only in Ghana. So as Emma mentioned, was to introduce camera when we try to monitor the phenology of trees. And this is Bismarck trying to install one of the camera in Ghana. So except sending the camera, we also try to have the feedback from the people who was able to use that. There was 2 types of interest. There was a trade of camera, how they did that to receive that, how they manage the understanding, the setup. And then there was also another interest, was the mobility of data form. But at this point, we would not touch that because until now, we haven't done that yet. So this is view of some of the questions to the team, for instance, to see how they feel about the way they receive the camera, if it was easy or it was difficult. And also, did they add some money to get the camera? This is some of the issue in Africa. and how many times it took them to understand the setup and to put that and to send that to the field. So when we take some of the example of interest, for instance, the camera reception, it was not easy, it was very difficult. And the 2 point was the time to send. With who should we send that? Should we send that alone or should we send that with someone? And then at arriving in one country, it was like, how can you receive that very quickly? Because it can be a delay where you have to pay some money to get that. And at some point, if I take the case of Kenya, there was some other issue regarding the reception and other process. And in Gabon, we try to look for someone traveling from England to Gabon. And sometimes if we are not a good person of the schedules change, it can also make a delay. Then the expenses, yeah, even though you pay all the charger, for instance, in England, when the material arrive in one of country in Africa, we can have more money to pay because there is other bill that we didn't consider where we develop the proposal or we get the funding for those cameras. And then because the delay was so long, so the camera arrived a little bit late. And for this workshop, we was trying to have some data to show you. So then the setup of the camera was fast, so that's why it was not easy. And they didn't have enough time to go and also look for a way of putting the camera on the ground. For instance, in the case of at the same time you want to look for the tree canopy, but at the same time you want also to look for liana. So how can you manage both when you try to focus the camera? Where should you do that? And they also note that when the camera is well fixed, this camera is not disturbed, because sometimes I think we are used to when we set up camera, sometimes some animal like elephant and other or chimpanzees, they try to remove the camera. So this is a view of some of the pictures that Bismarck took according to the setup. On the left side, you can see that he tried to focus on some of the canopy tree where we can see the canopy, but not specific tree, but just through the landscape. And over here, I think he looked for more underground trees, and by taking one of the big tree around that, and then we can see the top of the canopy. So then when we talk about a canopy, the people who use this camera over there, they try to mention different spots that looking at the spots that provide more information or where they capture. You can see that even though we have those all feedback we need, they was able to just give feedback from only 5 of the feedback of the points that we was looking. So we can still want to know which kind of feedback should we ask the team and ask them to answer all the questions. Then when we move to ask them if there was enough camera and if the camera can replace the field work, then people say that no. But at the same time, for the camera, they think that there is more camera to set up than just 1 or 2, because they were thinking that we can surrounding an area with camera so that we can have a maximum of image. And for them, because we are looking at landscape, they were thinking that we can miss individual tree phenology observation, and the camera cannot do that. until now, maybe we don't have yet the good methodology for that. So the takeaway from this first experience is to see that there is issue to find a way to send the camera if we buy that in Europe or in United States. And when we set up the funding or the proposal for funding, we have to take into account that we can have other expenses in the country where we are sending those. And the schedule of sending and starting to use those cameras to be reviewed, because as the people mentioned in Ghana, it can take time to understand the camera and to set up that. And as I was mentioned, they mentioned that to have a good view of one area, we can need more camera, not just one. And until now, with this first experience, they feel that the camera can help understand the phenology across the landscape, not on individual tree, as we do with field monitoring. And finally, they conclude or they consider that camera can just be an additional method to the ground direct observation. Thank you. Erin, are you here?
Yeah, thank you, Desiree. And before I think we'll ask Bruna and Desiree to do their presentation next, and then we can have a kind of questions session based on the field trials and cameras with all three of you. And yeah, so Bruna and Desiree, we have spoken to before we conducted these field trials, actually, or as we were conducting them, to get some advice on how we can set them up. And they sent us some videos on and some useful advice on how to attach them and what times of the day to focus on and things like that. But it's interesting that from our feedback there, we discovered that perhaps we just didn't have enough time or expertise. And as Desiree's mentioned, she's been working with cameras in phenology since 2017. So now the two of them, one after the other, will be able to present some of their experience and elaborate on how that has, what that has been like to work with cameras successfully over the years, and what research questions are good and suitable for addressing in phenology with cameras. So over to you guys.
Okay, so we have split it between us. So I'm going to talk a little bit, and then next Desiree is going to complement our talk. So let me just share here the screen. Can you see? Okay. Well, I'm just okay. I have to hide all this. Is this taskbar shown to you? Do you know how to?
I can see the screen, Bruna.
It's okay. Can you see?
That's good.
Okay. Okay. So I'm going to talk a little bit about our experience with some ecological questions that we can address using the phenocams, and well, then later we can talk about what we already have with the cameras installed in your sites, and have ideas and perspectives of what we can do and why we need to improve the camera monitoring. So here's just a synthesis of our imagery processing protocol. So I believe you already have on this step, you have the camera set up and you are collecting images. So the next step, it's one of the most important, is the choice of the region of interest, the ROI. So it's the portion of the image that we intend to analyze, and is the it's the focus to answer our ecological question. And then we can extract the imagery pixels and then calculate the vegetation index and have something like that. So here's an example of the vegetation index that was calculated, and we can see model it in function of the time and how it changes and show the seasonality of the leaf production. Something how the scan is showing here above. We have here with the green index that we say it's representing like the flushing of the leaves in this community. And also we also use it here, associated variables to help us investigate like phenological patterns and drivers and so on. So, and here we have an example of the software that we are currently using to do all this image processing. We use part of the protocol is run in this software. It's a Java language that our research group has developed, and part is developed in our language, like the filtering the raw data that is extracted, and to have like this tiny series like this, daily values of time series. So I have addressed the most interesting questions that I think that will be important, like a way to start the analysis of the phenocam imagery. So I believe the first and most important question is, what are the leafing phenological patterns for the tropics? Because we still don't know, not enough. We have this lack of phenological observations for the tropics, especially long-term time series. And using phenocameras, it's a way to establish long-term monitoring. Because it's feasible when you have like sensors in the field to monitor a vegetation. And we know about the high complexity heterogeneity that we have in the tropics. So further analysis needed. We need more investigation and more studies in different vegetation types, like to have this, to have like a systematic understanding of like how dynamics of leafy temporal patterns are occurring along the tropics, right? So here we have some examples. The main index that we are using is the GCC and RCC. So one index that is representing the leaf flushing events is the GCC, and an index that is representing like the senescence processes that is occurring in the vegetation is the RCC. And also, as I said before, the selection of the region of interest is very important because we can have different perspectives. So here is an example of different regions of interest selected in the same image. So we have the community profile to the individuals of some species, and so we can have like analysis of species, populations, the whole community. And here we have another example of two tiny series, that one is representing the community of the vegetation, and another one to confront. We only selected the deciduous species, the deciduous phenological strategy, the species that present the deciduous strategy within the image to confront the two data sets. And we can do that with other phenological strategies or with other groups that we may think that it's important to compare within the same image. And another Another point that is very important, and the phenocams are able to allow us is to track fast responses, fast plant responses. So, for example, here we have a high seasonal vegetation. We call it here Caatinga. It's a dry forest, and it has a fast response to precipitation pulses. This would not be able to be tracked by ground observations, for example. Usually ground observations, they cannot be carried daily. Sometimes they're weekly or are monthly. And here we have changes that are occurring like within 3 or 5 days. 3 or 5 days. So we can track like fast responses because we have this fine scale monitoring using the cameras. Another important question that we believe is what drives leaf phenology in tropical vegetation. So we know that plants are responding mainly to climate. By knowing to which triggers plants are responding, we may like forecast like climate change scenarios and how this may affect the health of the ecosystems, for example. So here we have some examples of a multi-site analysis. So a good thing, a cool thing that we can get from phenocams monitoring, it's like have different sites being monitored simultaneously, and we can collect data simultaneously along the sites. So here's an example. We have analyzed like 4 different sites at the same time. And we have analyzed it like in a community perspective. So we have selected like the whole image to extract the phenological information. And as you can see, we can do like this time series analysis. We can fit models over this time series, and by that we can extract phenological metrics, for example, like onset date of start of season, end of season, length of the season. The season here is like the season of the leaf production within the community. And this is good because we can like within sites, you can do like an analysis of interannual variation, so we can understand along the cycles how these data are changing or are the variation. And we can compare like among sites, and we can establish like an intercomparison of sites and have like an understanding of how the patterns of leafing are changing across different sites. Here, sites are changing according to the degree of seasonality. So we can see we have a very dry site towards less dry site, and also they are changing in relation to the vegetation structure. So we have also used the time series extracted for each one of the sites to model with climatic parameters and to understand, like to have insights about the main drivers that are triggering the leafing. And we have found like more drier sites are responding more to water, less drier sites are responding more to photoperiod. But at the same type of vegetation, for example, here, these 3 sites, B, C, and D, they are all cerrado, which is our savanna vegetation, but they have different structure of vegetation. So here we have an herbaceous, and here we have more a wood dominant vegetation, and they are having different responses. Like herbaceous are responding more to water drivers, and trees are responding more to photoperiod drivers, for example. The last question that I have that I am here to present is how cameras can be used as a conservation tool for threatened ecosystem. Also, to monitor neglected ecosystems, for example, grasslands. It's a type of ecosystem that that has few studies involving leaf phenology, and also all the types of vegetation that because you cannot achieve several types of vegetation, but with the camera, as we have this remote monitoring, we can achieve different types of vegetation, and the most remote areas that we cannot access, cameras can, and we can establish this monitoring. And the good thing is that cameras are able to track change in landscape, any disturbance that is occurring, deforestation, flooding, fire events, any kind of plant damage. And the cool thing is that we can monitor leaf phenology from sites that we haven't this information before. For example, here we have a grassland, a tropical grassland here in Brazil, that we haven't any type of leaf phenology information from that. And now we have more than 7 years of leafing phenology information. And also we were able to track a fire event that has occurred. So we can have we have this information. We have the right moment that the fire started. And the cool thing is that we can track in a fine scale monitoring how vegetation is recovering from that disturbance. So here we are using different methods to calculate like a recovery index to evaluate how different types of vegetation that have been damaged by a fire, how they are recovering from this event. So we are now analyzing we are working with that. So this is a way that cameras also can be used. And this is a very good tool for management of protected areas and for purpose of conservation, for example. So that's this is the questions that I thought that could be more interesting to show to you. We have much more examples that we are what we are studying in our research group. So well, we can discuss that later. I think that Desiree I can pass to Desiree to respond. Thank you.
Thanks, Bruno.
Thank you, Bruna. Shall I start?
Yes, whenever you're ready.
Okay. Can you see it? Is it possible to see my screen?
Yes, it's fine.
Okay. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for the invitation. I'm very happy to share what we have building through these years in Caatinga Dry Forest until now. And we decided to split it in two perspectives. Bruna talked more about the ecosystem level, at the community level, and I will go to talk about the individual level applications of the phenocams and species level. And I will show examples from dry forests and savannas. First, I'd like to introduce our phenocam network. It's called the e-phenology. This phenocam network is the largest phenocam network in the tropics. It started in 2011 with the huge effort of Patricia and Bruna. And when they spread cameras over Brazil, and these cameras were placed to represent most of the biomes we have, like the Amazon forest, Atlantic rainforest, cerrado savannas, Brazilian savannas, and rocky grasslands. And later in 2013, the first point in dry forest was included. And we have different fields of views, ways to place the cameras and ways to place. Well, in 2017, by the project, through the Nordeste project, the Phenological network was expanded to dry forests in Brazil, which is mostly focused on northeast of Brazil. And we tried to encompass all the environmental variation in this dry forest, Brazilian dry forest, and we set up the cameras in a lot of regions ranging from more than 1,000 millimeters of precipitation to 300 millimeters of precipitation, and also ranging a lot in physiognomic variation. We have tall forests of 13 meters to like more shorter forests of about 4 meters of height. And we have different cameras set up. This is the Bushnell, as you are using, and this is the camera we call Mobotics, is the hemispheric view and landscape view types. And as Bruna showed to you, we can, with all cameras, track phenology at the community level here, for example, with the index GCC, seen from above of a tower. But we also can track phenology at the individual level and also species level, represented by the average of several individuals or other ways. How can we do that? We can do that by selecting regions of interest that represent different species crowns. But I couldn't, I could realize how difficult it is for you, as have shown us that not always we have a tower to place the camera and have that type of view. And in that case, I would suggest, for example, to select an area instead of crowns. You can select areas in the image, like Bruno have shown you previously. You can select a whole area that contains lianas, and then this will represent the liana pattern. Or we can place the camera in a high place. Sometimes the topography allows us to do that also, like on the top of a hill, but not always. And then we can track leaf phenology at the individual level. This is a GIF that I like very much. It's one dry forest of Brazil, and we know that in dry forest, a conspicuous adaptation of plants is tightly related to leaf phenology. The leaves are completely, they completely fall in the dry season, and then after a little pulses of rainfall, all the crowns became with leaves. And we know that almost all are deciduous, but there is a lot of variation among individuals. So this is an approach that we can have, understanding what else, and not only climate, is responsible for it influences the living patterns of species. And then we ask it if this pattern is related to wood density, or if they vary across a gradient of aridity. Then this is an approach that we can have with cameras by spreading them across regions. This is an advantage of the cameras. So I will show the first results of studies in Caatinga, which is the largest neotropical dry forest and the richest, and it's in northeast of Brazil. But we know that dry forests are dry, right? They have low amounts of rainfall, but this varies a lot across regions. For example, here in Brazil, we have these 3 sites that range from 300 millimeters to 700 millimeters from the center of the continent to the coast. And we exploited the patterns of wood density in these 3 areas. So we know in Caatinga there is a pattern related to wood density, a leafing pattern, when on most of species with low wood density produce leaves earlier than the high wood density species, and the leaf fall also occur earlier than the high wood density species. And one of the hypotheses is that they avoid collapse of vessel during the transitions from rainy to dry season, because the evapotranspiration becomes very high in this moment of the year, and this can be dangerous to the vessels. So some species with low wood density drops their leaves first and before the rainfall stops to avoid the situation. This is a pattern also found in other dry forests, where some species are able to produce leaves even in the middle of the dry season, when no other species are producing leaves. And that the explanation that the researchers have found is that wood density could influence this pattern. Why? Because wood density, species with low wood density are able to store more water for the simple reason. And being able to use this stored water to flush in situations that others are not able. So we tested this hypothesis by selecting individuals with different wood density patterns, low wood and high wood densities, the white and black one individuals, but we also can have the community level ROI by selecting the entire area of the camera. This is the hemispheric view, but we can also do it with Bushnell camera. And what we found by using daily, hourly data, and we found that the start of season in the three areas are not related to wood density as previously thought in two growing seasons, but the end of season, the timing of leaf fall, is related to wood density. And in two areas, the leaf fall occurred earlier than for the high wood, occurred earlier for the low wood density species than for the high wood density species. But what else we can try to use to understand the leafing patterns? Not only the trait wood density, a species trait, but we have another several leaf traits that could explain these patterns. And we know that to produce a leaf is costly to the plant. And one of the measurement of how much a plant invests in a leaf is the LMA area. It's the higher the LMA, leaf mass per area, the higher the cost to the plant. So it's assumed that a plant should keep a leaf long enough to pay back the initial investment on the leaf construction. So based on this, there is a prediction that the leaf lifespan, the time of the duration of a leaf, should be positively correlated to the LMA area, LMA trait. And this is one application of camera at the individual and species level, together with species traits to explaining the leafing patterns. And so inside from the leaf economic theory spectrum, we are testing if the leaf lifespan, if there is a correlation of leaf lifespan and other traits, leaf traits, by using the cameras to infer about the leaf lifespan. So this is one application, but in Cerrado, we also are using at the individual and species level to understand the leafing patterns of species of Cerrado, the Brazilian savannas. And we already know that in Cerrado, some species flush their leaves during the rain season and others during the dry season. One hypothesis is that the species that flush their leaves during the dry season, they do so because there are fewer predators in this period. So they are decoupled. They don't produce leaves when the average is producing leaves, because there are fewer predators, and then they can escape from herbivory. And we are understanding the leaf level patterns of species. We are trying to understand if the start of season of different groups of species, deciduous, semi-deciduous, and evergreen forests, are related to leaf traits that can represent defense against herbivory. For example, the LMA is an example. The higher the LMA, the higher the investment in structures of defense against herbivory is one of the premises. And with the first results, we could classify them into species that are producing leaves in the rain season and in the dry season. And now this is our only preliminary results. We are still analyzing, and now we are going to try to understand if those species have traits that are good against herbivory, for example. These are only two examples with traits. All these examples I gave are with traits. But Bruna also showed a lot of examples that at ecosystem level that I think it may be important for you, but we need to understand more what the possibilities of fields of views that you have in Africa. I understand that have only shown some examples, but there are more, I guess. And then after saying that, we show that the applications of camera is wide. We can range from individual level to ecosystem level, and I think that's the great advantage of the cameras. And that's all. Thank you for watching.
Thanks, Desi.
Thank you, Desi.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. If anyone has any questions for Desiree or Bruna or Hervé, perhaps we could have those now. If that's made anyone think of anything they'd like to discuss.
Did my screen stop it?
Yes.
Oh,
yeah,
okay.
we're just.
Oh yeah, it does now. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, can I go with my question?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Desi and Bruna, thank you again for this experience. I have a few questions. Even though you are talking about leaf, do you have someone working on food production, looking at food production with your setup? That is the first question. And then the second one is, how much is the tool to set up the tool? And can you move that, or it's a fixed site and you have to set up many tools around the...
I have that written down too. What is the cost of a tower?
Yeah, yeah, thank you.
Well, do you want to start, Desi?
Go ahead, Bruna.
So we haven't done any studies monitoring food production. We are still focused on leaf vegetative phenophases. They always ask us if we monitor flowers and fruits, but we can see them, some of them in the image, but yet we haven't developed any protocol to quantify them using the analysis that we are currently using. So yeah, but this is an idea. It's something that people want to do, but we haven't developed it yet. But there are ways. Because we use the RGB system, digital system, but we can also use the HSV, so we can have other values from the images, not only related to the red, green, and blue, but also values of hue and saturation, and these values can indicate another colors. So it would be possible to track other objects, other things, not only leaves in the image. Well, and about the price of the towers, well, most of our sites, we already have the towers over there. So
lucky you.
this is something that really helps. For example, our oldest site, the Cerrado Core site, we already have this tower. It's not the best tower, but it's like a triangle tower. Like here we use for mobile phones. It's a tower like that, and it was there from an old project that Patricia participated in the past, and the tower remained. And we started over there with the camera. And then what we did was we seek for research groups that were working with flux towers, so we could use the flux towers to deploy our cameras. So this is a way to find good poles to put the cameras, because we know that it's not easy. We also have this problem to how to install the cameras. We need like a place, a good field of view. So we did that with the first cameras, and then we went to monitor grasslands, so we don't need like big towers to monitor grasslands as well. But Desiree has a good experience like finding places, because Desiree didn't have towers in all the sites, and she find herself good places to install the cameras.
Yeah, this is very interesting. When I started, most of sites in Northeast, they didn't have a tower. So I need to find a field of view to answer some questions, for example. And we set up them on trees like you did. But I must admit that sometimes it's tricky. We need to climb high trees, and sometimes you install the camera, you set up the camera on a tree, and a branch just grow inside of the camera, and it stops, and then you can't have the view anymore, and they have to change the camera. Those problems happen, but they are part of. We deal with them, and now we are setting up the cameras on poles in places that you can't have a high view. We set up them on poles. We don't know if it's possible in Africa because of the big mammals, right? The elephants, they can move the camera around us. I don't know.
Some sites suffer with that more than others, yeah.
Yeah, in some sites, yeah, there's a lot of variation among sites.
Poles is interesting though, as a much less technical, much less infrastructure required for a pole than a tower.
Yeah, less infrastructure. Yeah, much less.
In Gabon, we have different phone polling over the landscape. I think we can use that. Even at Lope, we have few of them.
Interesting.
Yeah, interesting. So I have a final question. When I was listening to both of your talk, it seems that you have only one side of where you set up the camera. Are you putting the camera to different height, or just using one height?
Well, usually we try to standardize this distance from the canopy. Usually we use 10 meters from the top of the camera to the top of the tower. Well, actually, there are towers that are they are higher than that. So we just try to deploy the camera like from 10 meters to the top of the canopy. This is more or less where we're trying, when it's possible, to maintain this distance from those. When we're talking about these cameras that you saw, that is like this hemispherical image, because they are set up in a way that we can control this distance. But sometimes I don't know, when you don't have this field of view from above, you have like a landscape field of view. It's different. We cannot. It's not possible to maintain this. I mean, you put in the way that you can at least keep most of the vegetation.
Okay, thank you. Good job.
I have a question for you. Why that price so high? 180 pounds to take the camera from the port. Why is it so expensive?
This is the customs charge, is it? Yeah.
Yeah, it's the customs charges for the cameras we had to pay in Ghana. So yeah,
similar price in Kenya.
Yeah, it has a number of strange taxes in there. Yeah, and so
it's a lot. It's better that someone brings to you.
Put in a bag and go to Africa. Yeah.
We sent 3 cameras, which is like $450 worth, and then you pay 180 for customs charges. So.
Wow. Yeah.
It's it's tricky, but it's a discussion that we've had. You know, we can't buy those cameras. Hervé Bismarck can't buy those cameras in country. You had this problem, right, Bruno and Desi? So you went with Bushnell because you can buy them in Brazil. But it just seems so frustrating to need to rely on, you know, someone to travel between. It just seems so difficult. But yeah, this is the problem that we face.
It would be the same if you ship them as a gift.
Yeah,
it would be the same.
I think so, but it's yeah, obviously if the funding is coming in to say my institution, and then we have to buy the cameras through my institution's protocols, which is through central procurement, you know, it's like then it all has to be done properly, obviously, and then it incurs charges on the other end. So it's really challenging, and I think I find it, you know, it seems such a simple thing to be talking about. We want to be talking about the science, right? All of us here. And yet, you know, it's so, I feel it's so frustrating for all of us because, you know, this is the very real logistics barrier that is like holding back my colleagues here, my fellow research colleagues from developing your own research agendas. We can get the funding, we can work together, and then we can't get the technology to you.
Yeah.
And it's not something we can solve, right, as part of projects, but we need to come up with ways to come around it. And I think, like Hervé said, like developing time into these projects to allow for this kind of delay, but often these charges are not transparent, right? So it's difficult to budget for them in the project to begin with because it's not easy to find out how much the charges are. And things.
Well, but we are very, very used to the situation, Emma. Like we are facing a lot of problems like this with bureaucracy. It's not the good point is that our financial, the capacity, which is financial, most of our project, they have like they do the purchases for us. The international purchases, so we don't have all this problem. But when we have to buy anything here in Brazil, we always face like problems. Invoices, a lot of invoices and delay from it's a problem as well.
Bismarck, did you have a question as well?
Yes, I have questions. Yeah, and I also had a question on the tower, and then thankfully Hervé asked that one. Because I was interested in knowing whether they had towers in all sites, and then we have a response for that already. My second question is on the hypothesis. That was by Desiree. She mentioned some hypotheses to explain why some of the plants shed their leaves in the wet season. Yeah, I was just wondering if linking it to herbivory and predation. Yeah, do you pay attention to the interaction between plants and animals as part of the phenocam network?
Not yet. We are using data from the literature because we couldn't do field work because of the pandemic. When we started this project, it's an undergrad student project, and we planned to do field work to measure the leaf consumption, leaf predation by herbivores, but we couldn't. And so at first we are analyzing the data through plant trait data that represent defense against herbivory and see if there is a pattern of leaf lifespan on those traits, and we are using the cameras to get the leaf lifespan data. So first is this, but we want to do so soon to measure these interactions. It would be very interesting, and it's rarely done. The people normally don't register these interactions of herbivory.
Yeah,
and we will try to do.
It would be nice to see, yeah, what you find. My second question was on how to map camera images to the ground. When we set up ours, we try to say, okay, based on the angle of the camera, we think that this tree and that plant would be within the range, yeah, the view of the camera, and it wasn't the case. The images were out, and the trees we thought should be within the focus of the camera were also somewhere else. So exactly how do you map the images? How do you map camera images to the ground? I think there was, in your presentation, you were talking about phenology of specific individuals. Yeah, so how are you able to do that? Is someone there on the tree or on the crane, and then yeah, they're trying to map it in that way? Or yeah, I'm trying to see how that works.
Would you like to answer, Bruna?
How do we map the trees? Well, it's the most manual way that you can imagine. We go to the field, we climb. It's because it's a little bit, because when we set up our cameras, we already have like a community view. So what we have to do is, okay, we have this community view. Now we're going to each crown, and we are going to identify this crown in the ground, and then we identify like the species, and we do like a map in the image. In your case, I don't know, the images that I saw, you have like a landscape view. It's part of the community, but you are looking the trees like in the front point of view. So sometimes when you do that, one tree is like covering the other trees, so you cannot see like a lot of trees. That's why this said that instead of selecting individual trees, you could like select part of the image, and you could have like this community perspective instead of single trees. But well, what as we do, we go to the field, someone climbs the tower, someone stays in the ground, and we try to map, like we use like sometimes a balloon or something colorful, and someone stays with the camera on, and we start to look each one of the crown, and we start to mark and identify each one of them. This is how we map our camera sites.
Okay.
But yeah.
But
I understand that,
because
but the Bushnell it's different, because in our camera, the Mobotics camera, we can have like a live image, so we can look to the image at the same time that someone is it's selecting the tree in the ground. So it's different. The Bushnell, it's a little bit tricky, because you need to have a picture and look to the picture that it is steady, and then you have to look. You can mark some trees if you are able to, and do the picture and see if each one of the crown is the crown that you think it is, and try to map at least the crowns that you can fully see in the image.
I just want to compliment Bismarck. What do you remember that image that I show you of a Bushnell camera and several crowns identified in the Bushnell camera? How I do that? I print the image, go to a tower, and I draw in the image. Okay, this is a crown that I can see. This is another one, and then I stay drawing. And someone in the field, as Bruno said, go there and shake the tree, and I see, okay, it's that tree. Which one is that? and the person says, or do a tag if the person doesn't know, tag the plant, and after a specialist identifies. Or if the person knows, they can say, oh, this is a species X, for example, and then we identify them. But in your case, that images that her show us, I would suggest select the entire area that represent lianas. We are doing the same in the SECO project. We want to draw areas that represent grass stratum. With grass, we don't identify individuals, right? And then we select the entire area then we are of grass and trees stratum without identifying individuals. Not always we need to identify individuals. It's good when we have this possibility. We can do both understand that the community or functional trait species patterns, but if we don't have a way, we can still have the camera and still have good information about grass and trees, for example, lianas, and that's it.
Okay, thank you. If I may ask one more question.
Sure.
How many cameras do you have per unit area for what you are doing? Is there any idea?
You mean the size of the area that we are monitoring? Is that the question?
No. I would want to know if you have an area of, say, in the Cerrado area where you are monitoring, what's the size of the area and how many cameras do you have in an area like that? So I'm looking at camera density.
Each site we have one camera. The hemispherical one, we are usually we use one hemispherical camera per site, and also Desi. What we do sometimes is associate with an hemispherical image. We associate some Bushnell that have this landscape field of view. We associate some Bushnells together with the hemispherical image, but usually in the studies that you saw about the community patterns, we are using only the one hemispherical camera per site.
Yeah, sometimes we have 4 Bushnells in a site. It depends. It highly depends on the site and the feasibility of visiting the site to get the images. If we have people going often to the field there to collect the image, we have more cameras. It's better to have more cameras. And something that he commented was that one possibility would be to get more individuals would be to set up more cameras. This is a possibility. If you really want individuals and the field of view is difficult, you set up more cameras in different angles and trying to get more individuals. This is a possibility, but it's expensive. The cameras are expensive and the batteries too. So there's a trade-off between these two. But that's it. It varies a lot, the number of cameras that we are using per site.
And one thing that I don't know if I understood it right, but you have a ground observation in the site as well?
Yes.
Where you set up the cameras?
Yes. Yes.
I think it's a great opportunity to correlate the two methods, and even because counting that you have like a few cameras, or you don't have like the best community view, you can use the images that you have, try to find the species or even patches of the images, and you can check your ground observations and try to correlate them, because sometimes your community pattern in the ground can be very correlated to the community pattern of the camera. I mean, we don't know. You could try to test, like try to validate your ground observations with what camera are looking to it. So this is a wide range of studies that you can develop using ground and cameras, and this is very interesting. If you already have this data, you don't even have to have the entire cycle of cameras. You can have just parts of some periods if you already have the ground observations. So this is
well, that's really encouraging, Bruna. I mean, basically we have 3 field sites just represented here that we sent cameras to. So in Lope we have intact tropical forest, and in Ghana we have different, slightly drier forest, shorter, little, different type of ecosystem. Bismarck can talk us through that. But we've got 2 contrasting forest types. And then in Kenya, with my colleague Asanat, who is on the call, we have an agroforestry trial. So 1 species planted in a regular interval. And we have 3 cameras now for each of these sites. And we are actively recording phenology data from direct observations at these sites. So the aim was to deploy the cameras for a couple of months and compare the data, but we are just at the stage now really where Bismarck has the cameras and we're just deploying them now at each site. So we're a few months behind, but that's really encouraging that you think that is a good use of them, because that's what we're hoping to do going forward.
Yes, I'm sure. Yeah.
Just looking at the time, if it's okay, I think this collaboration between Bruno and Desi and your expertise in this area is going to be really helpful going forward, and I think we're going to need to have more of these conversations. So I think I'll draw those conversations to a close, because we probably could ask a lot of questions and the time is running on. I just wanted to end thinking about a few less technical points, but a few more kind of overarching ideas. So maybe just for 10 minutes now, if anyone needs to leave, we understand we've gone on beyond our stated time, so please feel free if you need to go. But if you're able to stay for another 10 minutes, maybe we could just talk about a couple of things. I'm just going to share my screen again briefly. I'm just going to go back. So I always really struggle how to talk about phenology, because even amongst scientists, sometimes it is not a term that people know a lot about. But definitely outside of science, I try and avoid using the term phenology to policymakers, because what is this word phenology? But thinking about it just today, I was realizing, again, it's also interdisciplinary, and I really like this idea of it being a discipline where climate and biodiversity meet. Like I said before, I think this really chimes into these 2 major crises that we're facing as policymakers, but also how this discipline works in bringing together meteorologists and environmental scientists to understand how this kind of interface of the interaction. And phenology is so important because it's not just how climate influences biodiversity, it's how biodiversity goes back to feed back onto the climate in this loop. And I think that's why we sometimes struggle to place ourselves in the right funding place or in the right policy place, but actually that's where the strength is as well. So just going back to big picture, I think it's kind of interesting to keep that context in mind as we're all of us thinking about projects and funding and how to be really effective in what we do. And this isn't very well drawn out, so please bear with me. I'm trying to develop this idea, but from the things that we've learned through this project, we're really aiming to sort of be able to deliver some kind of early warning system for ecological changes in Africa. That's what we feel is really needed in the climate space, in the climate adaptation space, thinking about climate change. And the question why, I think Desi and Bruna have given us a really helpful introduction to the kind of research questions that can be addressed. When we're looking at leafing cycles, we're thinking about seasonality of canopy cover, we're thinking about carbon dynamics, productivity of the landscape, and we know that leafing is clearly, the leafing of the tropics feeds directly back onto climate through reflection of solar energy through CO2 levels. All these kind of things are so closely interrelated. But also we have a lot of motivations for studying flowering and fruiting, whether this is changes in seasonality of resources, trophic cascades and synchronicity, and long-term changes in species composition. And this is important for wildlife and people who depend on natural resources. So these are the sort of research questions that we can address in this area. And then we have the how do we monitor this, and that's what we've been talking a lot about today as well. You know, what are the field methods that we use? How do we scale up? And in the African Phenology Network, this project was saying, how do we increase capacity for ecological monitoring in Africa? Do we train lots more people to do direct observations of canopies? Well, there's lots of problems with that. How do we maintain salary funding for a long period of time, inter-observer bias, all these kind of things? Do we go down a technological route and invest in cameras that have their own logistical challenges but can address some of those problems that we face with canopy observations? So this project has really been about, you know, us as the African Phenology Network upskilling in terms of learning some new techniques, getting access to these new technologies, getting our hands on the cameras, putting them in the field, you know, being able to have these discussions with experts in this area and really understand how we can use these things in the field. But what we have to now do is take a step back and say, well, what is the research question that we want to use these methods for? Now we know kind of how they work and what capacity they have. What's the research question? What are we going to be trying to address going forward? And I guess thinking about where does the African Phenology Network sit in that? At the moment, I think we are an expert network that we can help resource, you know, research collaborations in Africa. So we already have people coming to us to ask to link into these contact networks, but also to advise on methods. And I think that's a really good place for us to be. You know, we can try and resource research going on. And of course, there are many other like sort of plot networks in this area. And we don't want to be in competition to them. We want to, you know, support the work that they're doing in these plots and these different, you know, SECO is the project that Desi is now working on. You know, how do we, as the African Phenology Network, support what's going on and kind of collaborate with these other initiatives more closely? But I think there is value in having this very specialized network for phenology, because we have these kind of discussions that other people probably don't want to have in terms of how does this work and how do we take it forward. But I guess my question is, do we also want to set our own sort of research agenda? Do we want to take forward, you know, actual new research? Are we looking for funding to take research forward, or are we just going to be facilitating other research? That's just a question that I have for you. And a couple of things I thought we could think about. And again, we might not have time now, so it might be future discussions. So that's the first one. Should the African Phenology Network remain a technical kind of resourcing network, or should it start to have its own research agenda? How can the African Phenology Network develop better relationships with policymakers? So one of the outcomes of our survey is that we didn't reach many policymakers. Is that another way we can support the African research agenda? Like we can help researchers connect to policymakers. Maybe that's something we could do as a network and build expertise in. And then funding. This is our first experience of having our own funding through this project. If we're going to be applying for funding again, for what are we going to do with it? Are we going to do research? Are we going to do training? For whom? Where does it go? And to where? So like at the moment for this project, the funding came into Scotland. It wasn't the fund that we applied to. We were able to send equipment abroad, but we weren't able to fund members of the steering group in other countries. So looking at other maybe funding organizations where we can actually like send that money to the places where the research is ongoing. And finally, obviously, we have some very real logistical issues about we can come up with like the perfect research agenda, but then actually we have to face the practicality of how do do we undertake those things? So how do we design our research questions to be really smart about what the logistical issues are going to be, so that we don't just get stuck like trying to fight things that we can't change as a small research network? So those are some of my thoughts to kind of finish what we've talked about today. Did anyone have any comments on any of those? Before I can't see all of you, so I'll stop sharing. So does anyone want to say anything, or do you feel like that's an accurate summation of where we are right now, and we need kind of further things to kind of take that forward as a network, as a steering group? Great, I'll take that as a yes. I think we've
yeah, I was just wanting to see if anyone else wanted to say something, but I think you've made a good point that we do. It kind of feels like we're at a nexus where we have gathered all this experience and kind of realized that we are becoming in a bit of like an advisory network. Quite a lot of people are connecting through us, and research collaborations can happen through us. But we're also building quite a lot of experience for ourselves, and you guys continuing on as the steering group. Perhaps like it might be a difficult thing to do, to remain as a technical network without funding, obviously, and a lot of funding might come from research. So that could even be a practical route to take, to also have, you know, the African Phenology Network having its own research agenda, as well as you guys obviously being interested in doing research on African phenology.
Yeah, I mean, I'm really inspired by the, you know, the ambition in the e-phenology project that Bruno and Desi has described, you know, covering a whole country, a huge country, like, so, you know, like different landscapes. It'd be really great to start. I think a lot of us come in the phenology world from quite small sites where we dedicate for a long period of time, especially in the African context. I think that's where most people are coming from. But to actually sort of, you know, scale up the research ambition would be a really interesting exercise, I think.
Emma, I think that at least for phenocams, you are just starting. The e-phenology phenocam network started small, I guess. The first cameras were being placed slowly. It was one by one. So, and then the years has gone by very, very quickly, and it grows. It grow up. Okay. Yeah. But now, for example, there are a lot of possibilities. People from everywhere contact Patricia asking for collaboration, for data, to understand global patterns. So I think your network has the potential. It's just starting, at least from the phenocam approach, it's starting, but it will grow. And if I were you, I would keep your group, but also keep collaborating with others. But it's how the thing starts. Yeah, it's slow, but it goes well. I think from my point of view, when I started to set up the cameras in Caatinga Dry Forest, someone told me you're gonna need 5 years to have something meaningful for phenology. And I thought, oh my God, this will be a suicide. If I have to wait 5 years to have good data or to start, this will be a suicide, scientific suicide. But then the years go, they just gone. We have a lot of cameras, a lot of important things to do. Of course, there are the food research that you can implement later slowly. There are a lot of studies studying crops with cameras. There is a crop application with these cameras around the world to study the crop, the dynamics, and this is going to be important for African Phenology Network, I think. But you slowly can be adding the things. I think I don't have many experience with policymakers. We normally hate them. I don't know. We normally don't conversate with them. It's a huge mistake. I know we don't have a lot of social skills, abilities to talk to policymakers. I don't have opinion about that at the moment. But I don't know. I was just wondering, your field data. How long have your cameras, your African Phenology Network run? I don't remember. When did it started?
Well, we started in 2017 just as a name on the website, on a website. So then we started to connect with each other through this steering group. So, and now we just formed a steering group last year with myself, Bismarck, Asenat, and Hervé. So that was just literally Christmas last year. So it's very early, and we got some funding, and then Erin joined us. We were able to fund his position to coordinate this project, which has just really accelerated what we're doing. So that's it. So it's very early days.
I think soon, before that you imagine it will grow, and then you start to do larger things across continents. Maybe it's the way that the things are happening. I've seen this recently as a person that was not used to the method. I started in 2017, and then I could see how it grows fast and how the things happen. Well, just my opinion. I don't know.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think a lot of funders are really looking for, South-South collaborations. And I think, just observing this today, this is just such a brilliant example of that. And from my perspective, leveraging what we can from the UK in terms of funding, and then facilitating this highly technical South-South kind of collaboration is just I think really on point. Like, I think it's a really good place to be leveraging funding and to be moving forward with a lot of funders' agendas and things. So I think we're in the right place to develop some really good research projects out of this.
How many tropical networks do we know? We don't have tropical networks.
No.
Big representative. We need to start doing, and then I think these collaborations with your network and you and Patricia will be great. Will grow, and forward. Then I think I see good things in the future, near future.
Great, very encouraging. Thank you. And thank you both so much for giving so much of your time this afternoon on such short notice as well. We're really, really appreciative. I know Bismarck has just, I think his connection has gone, but he and Hervé, we're really keen to hear from you there, and Asenat as well. We're all listening in, and we listen back to these recordings. So the logistical issues mean that a lot of my colleagues struggle to join live, but we have other ways of sharing this information. So thank you so much. And just to end, this is our last workshop in this series, but I think it has been really positive. So we'll be looking to do seminars in the future, definitely. So watch this space. We've got our Twitter handle is the best way to keep up with what's going on. We do have an email mailing list as well. So look on our website for information to join that. Thank you to everyone for joining us. And thank you especially to Erin, who will be finishing with us this week officially. And he's managed these workshops brilliantly. I think, his first experience of doing this with an international audience and organizing all the Zooms around the world, and he's done it brilliantly and really moved us forward. So thank you so much, Erin. We're going to desperately miss you at the network, and see you all soon.